Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the immune system a little bit more in depth, focusing on the immune system of humans. And we had talked about in class the fact that there are two kinds of immune system in humans. First of all, there are the non-specific immune system, or the non-specific defenses, as it shows in this image. And then there are the specific defenses. The difference between these is their specificity, whether they react to a particular bacteria or virus, whether they react to what we call a particular antigen. Okay, so an antigen is a piece of a cell, if it's a bacteria, or a piece of a virus that the body can detect. All right, so antigens are basically, you can think of like the ID card that your body is constantly scanning for. And when it detects these antigens, that allows your body to determine if that cell is a good body cell that should be there, or if it's a dangerous bacteria that needs to be destroyed, or if it's a virus or things like that. So the antigen is just what your body's looking for and responding to. Now, non-specific defenses do not respond to specific antigens. They treat everything the same way. So for example, the first line of defense in your non-specific defenses is your skin, which blocks everything, right? It's not allowing some things to come through and not others. It's just blocking everything. In the same way, mucous membranes like those around your eyes or those on the inside of your lungs or those around the inside of your mouth, those also protect against things entering your body. And there's also certain chemicals like the acid in your stomach that help keep bacteria from going into your body in that way. Now, those defenses are not perfect, right? Your skin can be broken or cut, and also your mucous membranes, certain bacteria can go through those anyway. Some bacteria can live in your stomach. And so these are not perfect defenses, but they do a pretty good job most of the time. Then the second line of defense is a bunch of different things, as we talked about in class, but basically it comes down to the fact that you have macrophages, which are a kind of white blood cell, and we'll talk about those more today. These macrophages are cruising around your body all the time, checking to see if there's anything that they don't recognize, and if they don't recognize something, they just go ahead and eat it. They don't care if it was flu, they don't care if it was E. coli, they don't care if it was salmonella, they're just going to eat everything that doesn't belong in your body. And they also trigger a response, which is essentially, you can think of, they create swelling and they create fever in the case of a large infection or a serious wound. And that helps, again, to defend against pretty much everything. And it just harms all bacteria that might try to invade your body. But it's not specific to a certain kind of bacteria. Then we get to the specific defenses, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Specific defenses are for specific viruses or specific bacteria or specific fungi, that might try to invade your body. And what's great about the specific defenses, because they focus on a certain fungi or a certain virus, these defenses are actually much more capable. And they're one of the reasons that the human immune system and the vertebrate immune system, because we share this with most vertebrates, it's why it's really good. It's why we are actually very good at defending ourselves against bacteria. Whereas other organisms, crabs, for example, and insects, many of them have the non-specific defenses, but they don't have any specific defenses. And so their immune systems are just not as strong as ours are. All right. So when we think about the specific defenses of the body, there's going to be two different parts to it. The first part is what's called the cell-mediated response. And then the second part is what's called the humoral response. And that's not all on my screen here, but you can see that first word. All right, so the cell-mediated response is all about, it's all about cells. It's going to be focused on what cells do and a reaction between white blood cells and body cells. And then the humoral response comes from this old word, humors, and people used to talk about the humors as being all the fluids in the body. So the humoral response is the one that happens in the fluids of your body, like the blood and in your mucus and other things, extracellular fluids, and also something else called the lymph. But basically all the different fluids inside of your body, that's where the humoral response is going to occur. And so these are both important parts of the same process. All right, so starting with the cell-mediated response, okay? In the cell-mediated response, you have a body cell like this one. This is just a normal body cell. Okay, this might be a cell in your lungs or a cell in your esophagus or something like that. And this body cell has been invaded by viruses. This right here is our little representation of a virus. And that's how viruses work. They connect to a cell, they inject their DNA inside, and then the cell that they've infected is forced to produce lots and lots and lots of the virus. Okay, so you end up with a cell that's full of the virus, and the way the virus spreads is that it's going to burst that cell, and all those viruses are going to scatter everywhere and attach to other cells in the body, infect them, and then those burst, scattering the virus more and more and more. All right? So before that happens, your body wants to identify that this cell has been infected, and it wants to kill it. And that's the goal of the cell-mediated response. So all the cells in your body are designed so that when they get infected by a virus, they will actually chop up some little pieces of the virus, which on this picture are called granules. And what happens is there's a protein in the body called the MHC, and its job is to grab these little granules and put them on the outside of the cell. It actually holds them there. So you can see on the image, you know, here's a few places. This is where the MHC is holding one of those little granules, and right here as well. Well, that's important because you have a certain kind of white blood cell in your body. White blood cells are the ones that defend you against disease. And these white blood cells are called cytotoxic T cells. And cytotoxic T cells are always cruising around your body checking MHC proteins. And when they find an MHC protein that has a piece of a virus on it, that's the signal that that cell is infected. It's kind of like an SOS. The cell is saying to the white blood cell that it's infected, that it's going to die and it's going to hurt the body. And so the way that the cytotoxic T cell responds is, rather than letting those viruses spread, the T cell actually injects poisonous substances, basically, into the cell, causing the cell, the body cell, to self-destruct. All right, so this whole thing just goes ahead and kills itself. Okay, so this is one way that the body can go ahead and stop itself from reproducing a virus and spreading it throughout the body. But this is not it. I mean, notice that this requires the cytotoxic T cell to hunt through the body and check every single cell in the body. It has to find that granule and trigger that self-destruct sequence. That's really helpful, except, you know, there's trillions of cells in your body, and so having white blood cells go and check every single one, this would be kind of like having police officers go to every single house in every single, you know, and search every single room and every single desk trying to look for illegal substances. It might be really effective, but it would just take too much time. They would never get to everybody. And so we have other strategies that work on sort of a broader basis and allow your body to respond even more effectively to specific diseases. Okay? And so this next part, this is the humoral response, right? This is happening in the blood, this is happening in the fluid between cells, but we're not specifically trying to find infected cells this time. Instead, we're trying to find the actual bacteria or the actual virus floating around in your blood or floating around in the fluid between cells. And so let's say that happens. You've got a bacteria. This might be something like Salmonella. And what's going to happen is this bacteria is picked up by a white blood cell called a macrophage. Now, we talked about the macrophage before is a part of the nonspecific defenses. So this macrophage is just finding a bacterium. It knows that bacterium doesn't belong there, rather, and it goes ahead and eats it. And when the macrophage eats that cell, it's going to cut the cell up, and it's going to take some of these little antigens from the outside, little pieces of the cell wall and stuff like that, and it's going to present them using the MHC proteins, just like we saw in the cell-mediated response. And once again, other white blood cells are going to come along, and they're going to read the macrophage to see what kinds of things it's been eating lately. All right, and so when we move to this next step, we're going to have a cell called the helper T cell. Notice that before, the cytotoxic T cell was the one that read the MHC on the infected body cell. Helper T cells don't read body cells, they follow around the macrophages, and they read what the macrophages have been eating. And so that helper T cell is going to come along and it's going to read this MHC and it's going to find this antigen from the bacteria, maybe that Salmonella bacteria, and the helper T cell is going to be triggered and activated to realize that this was a bacteria, this was Salmonella, and we need to respond to Salmonella. All right, so, this is where it becomes a specific defense, because now the helper T cell is going to respond to that exact type of antigen. Each helper T cell is specific to a certain antigen. So this helper T cell's job is just to scan macrophages to see if any of them have picked up Salmonella or whatever the specific antigens they're responding to. Now, once that helper T cell identifies that antigen, it becomes activated. And what it's going to do is go find another cell called a B cell, and it's going to pass the signal along. It's going to pass that signal to the B cell. And what the B cell is going to do is it's going to release a whole bunch of, first of all, it's going to release a whole bunch of other proteins called cytokines. We talked about these in the nonspecific defenses, and these cytokines trigger things like fever and swelling. They also trigger the macrophages to start going crazy and eating a lot more stuff. But what's even more important is what the B cell does after being activated. Once that B cell is activated, it is going to divide and split into a bunch of different cells, okay? And it's going to make basically two different kinds. So right here you see the two kinds of B cells that activated B cell is going to become. It's going to become a group of memory B cells, which we'll talk about in a second, and it's going to become a group of plasma B cells. The job of a plasma B cell is to secrete antibodies, which are these little proteins that get released into the blood. And those antibodies are specific to the antigen that was detected. So in the case of, if you're helper T cell detects some salmonella. It's going to go trigger a B cell to produce a bunch of plasma cells. And those plasma cells are going to produce antibodies. And those antibodies are going to be designed to seek out exactly that protein from salmonella that was originally detected. And so this means that if you got some salmonella floating around in the blood, what's going to happen is these antibodies are going to detect that. They're going to come over here. They're going to latch on. They look like little Ys. They're going to latch on to this salmonella. And they're just going to coat it. So you're going to end up with this coating of antibodies all over the bacteria. And that does a bunch of things. First of all, because the bacteria is covered in antibodies, it can't really do the things it normally does. It can't really get food because its cell membrane is covered. It can't really reproduce. And then even more importantly, this covering of antibodies makes these cells a lot easier for a macrophage to come along and eat them. So macrophages are going to just go ahead and grab these guys and digest them now that they've been incapacitated by the antibodies. All right? Now, so that's the job of the plasma cells. These guys are the ones who are really going to war. They're going to cruise through your blood, pumping out thousands and thousands and thousands of antibodies, and those antibodies are going to find every single bacteria or every single virus or every single fungus in the body. They're going to coat it, and those things are going to die. Now, the real secret of our immune system, the most amazing thing about it are these memory cells. Because all the other cells we've talked about, they don't live very long. So you're going to, when you first are responding to this new bacteria in your body, you're going to get a bunch of plasma cells, and they're going to wipe it out. All right? And that's going to be the end of your cold, okay, or whatever symptoms you were feeling. You're going to start to get better the moment those plasma cells start to appear on the scene in a normal situation. But your body's a little bit smarter than that. It doesn't just trust that it can respond again next time. Instead, these memory cells continue to exist in your blood basically for the rest of your life. So now you have a bunch of cells ready to create antibodies, ready to create plasma cells, because that's what they'll do, and ready to detect this bacteria, again, if it ever shows its head. So if you ever get that bacteria or that virus later on in life, you already have memory cells, and they're going to be able to wipe that bacteria out before it even poses a problem. And this is why, for most bacteria and most viruses, you can only get them once. Or you can only get that specific kind. The flu, for example, you're only going to get that specific kind of the flu, you're only going to get that once. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of the flu, so you can get it year after year because it's always mutating and creating new antigens, and your body's trying to keep up. But that's how it works. We also know this about chickenpox and the chickenpox virus, that people only usually get chickenpox once, and that's because once you've had it, your body develops these memory B cells, and that's going to protect you against chickenpox in the future. It's not that you can't be exposed to it. You're going to be exposed to chickenpox a lot, but once that virus enters your body, your immune system is ready to take it out. And that's also the idea, lastly, behind vaccination. When you vaccinate somebody, let's say you want to vaccinate them against measles, usually the way you do it is they take either a dead measles virus or they take just a piece of the virus and they inject it into you. Now, your body detects this the same way it would detect the actual living virus or the whole virus, and it learns those antigens, and it mounts this response, and it creates memory cells against measles without requiring you to actually suffer from the measles in the first place, and then you become immune to it for the rest of your life. All right, so just a quick review. There's a lot of characters in this story, so I do want to make sure to go over these different white blood cells These are all kinds of white blood cells, right? Just so that you have them. So the macrophage, first of all, he's involved in everything. He's involved in the non-specific and the specific defenses, but primarily the macrophage is non-specific. It just hunts around and eats whatever it can find, okay? Now it helps to trigger the non-specific defenses because the macrophage is also the one that presents antigens to the helper T cell and triggers the humoral response, where the helper T cell goes and signals all these other kinds of cells to do their job. All right, so the cytotoxic T cell next, this one, is the one that goes around and scans individual cells to see if they have antigens on them, to see if they're infected. And if it finds an infected cell, it kills it. The helper T cells are ones that basically just signal other cells. So they pick up the antigens from the macrophage, they transmit that signal to a B cell. And when the B cell gets that message, it creates two other kinds of cells, the plasma B cell, which is responsible for creating antibodies that attach to the bacteria and viruses, and the memory B cell, which is responsible for providing protection against that specific antigen for the rest of your life.